End of page dash. End of page dash. Preface by Hilariba. In 1910, Kandinsky wrote his famous book On. The following year he finished and exhibited his first entirely non-objective canvases, which attracted worldwide attention and excited controversies of tremendous import. Between 1914 and 1921 Kandinsky lived in Russia, where he acted in several official artistic capacities. In 1919 he became the director of the Museum of Pictorial Culture in Moscow and, as such, founded the Institute of Artistic Culture, for which he wrote the recently published Culture Plan and Mass Belief. With his God-given freedom in the artistic, aesthetic creation of rhythm, he invented the first painting for painting's sake, and not for the sake of informative make-believe, as had been the ideal of the past. He found that a non-objective painting's rhythmic life, expressing creative invention, can be profound if done by a visionary master. Controlled by laws of counterpoint, make his artistic message as endlessly alive and original as nature itself. The artistic expression of our day no longer responds to materialistic objectives, it has advanced to become spiritually creative. No longer must the painter display a lemon to paint the beauty of an intense yellow, or search the sky to contrast it with a lovely blue, nor must he anywhere at all hunt for earthly motives before he is permitted to paint. Also a prophet of almost religious significance. The ideal of his art was conceived even before the utter illusion of the density of matter had been proved by science, and before the reality of frequencies and invisible forces had opened the imagination of man to unlimited expectations. The profound truth of Kandinsky's theories at once impressed those who were equally capable of feeling aesthetic enjoyment through his paintings and of realizing the importance of Kandinsky's mission at its advent. Tude and sense for aesthetic beauty, finding it immensely enjoyable and useful. Because the objective painting contacts earthly matter only, it cannot cause such spiritual evolution. To unfold the human soul and lead it into receptivity of cosmic power and joy is the tremendous benefit derived from the non-objective masterpiece, so intensely useful and conceived from the primary essence of creation. It is perhaps not without interest to remark that the thoughts developed in this small book are an organic continuation of my book, On the Spiritual in Art. Sense. At the beginning of the World War, I spent 3 months in Goldick on Lake Constance and employed this time almost exclusively in systematizing both my theoretic ideas, which sometimes had been imprecise, and my practical experience. Since 1914, the tempo of time seems to have been increasing in speed. Inner tensions accelerate this tempo in all spheres familiar to us. 1 year is possibly the equivalent of at least 10 years of a quiet, normal period. The 1 year which has elapsed since the appearance of the first edition of this book should be looked upon as the equivalent of 10 years. Further advances in the analytical method and, bound up with this, in the synthetic approach of theory and practice not alone in painting itself, but in other forms of art expression, as well as in the positive and spiritual sciences demonstrate the correctness of the principle which forms the basis of this book. Introduction. End of page dash. End of page dash. Every phenomenon can be experienced in 2 ways. These 2 ways are not arbitrary, but are bound up with the phenomenon developing out of its nature and characteristics, externally or inwardly. The street can be observed through the window pane, which diminishes its sounds so that its movements become phantom-like. The street itself, as seen through the transparent, yet hard and firm, pane seems set apart, existing and pulsating as if beyond. In reference to analytical examinations, the art of painting, strangely enough, assumes a special position among the various forms of art expression. Architecture, for example, by its nature closely bound up with utility, consequently requires from its very start a certain degree of scientific capacities. Music, which serves no practical use, with the exception of march and dance music, and which has until now remained abstract, has long developed its theory. Perhaps so far it is only one-sided, but, nevertheless, it is constantly being developed. Yerst and which, in Germany especially, have played a certain role in the development of colors. Very little has been transferred to our time of this earlier knowledge, which may even have represented a highly developed science of art. It is a strange fact that although the Impressionists destroyed the last remnants of painting theory in their fight against academicism, they immediately, though unconsciously, laid the first foundation stone of a new science of art, despite their contention that nature is the only theory for art. Elements. The researches which must become the cornerstone of the new science, the science of art, have two goals and proceed out of two necessities: the need for science in general, which grows spontaneously out of an inner extra-utilitarian urge to know, the pure science, and the need of balance in the creative powers, which can be grouped under two schematic heads: intuition and calculation, the practical science. We must, therefore, start here with the proto-element of painting, the point. The ideal of all research is precise investigation of each individual phenomenon in isolation, the reciprocal effect of phenomena upon each other in combinations, general conclusions which are to be drawn from the above two divisions. No text. End of page. Point. End of page. End of page. The geometric point is an invisible thing. Sometimes an unusual shock is able to jolt us out of such a lifeless state into vigorous feeling. Frequently, however, the most thorough shaking fails to revitalize the deadly condition. The shocks which come from without, sickness, accident, sorrow, war, revolution, wrench us violently out of the circle of our customary habits for a shorter or a longer time, but such shocks are, as a rule, looked upon as a more or less violent injustice. One after the other, these qualities' inner tensions come out of the depths of its being and radiate their energy. Their effects and influence upon human beings overcome ever more easily the resistances they set up. In short, the dead point becomes a living thing. We will select two typical cases from many possible ones. Let the point be moved out of its practical useful situation into an impractical, that is, an illogical, position. Thus arises a double sound print point besides the practical useful association. It is a balancing of two worlds which can never meet or agree. This is a useless, revolutionary state of affairs. The print is shaken by a foreign body which cannot be brought into any relation to it. Nevertheless, the point has been torn out of its customary state and prepares to leap out of one world into another. Externally, the point may be defined as the smallest elementary form, but this definition is not exact. It is difficult to fix the exact limits of the concept smallest. The relation of the size of the point to the size of the plane, and to the relative sizes of the point and of the other forms on this plane. Only by feeling are we able to determine when the point is approaching its extreme limit and to evaluate this. This approach to the external boundary, indeed, the crossing of it somewhat, the attainment of that moment when the point, as such, begins to disappear and the plane in its stead embarks upon its embryonic existence. This instant of transition is a means to the end. In this case, the end is the veiling of the absolute sound of the form, the emphasis on its dissolution, the note of imprecision in it, the instability, the positive movement, or the negative, as the case may be, the flickering, the tension, the abnormality in the abstraction, the risk of inner overlapping, the inner sounds of the point and the plane collide with each other, fuse, and then recoil, a dual note in a single form, that is, the creation of a double sound by a single form. As in the case of its size, its limits are equally relative. At the beginning of this chapter, in the course of the discussion of the practical useful value of the point in written language, the point was defined as a concept linked with the idea of silence of shorter or longer duration. The point, as such, makes a certain statement which is organically bound up with the utmost restraint. The point is the innermost concise form. It is turned inwards. The concept, element, can be understood in two different ways, as an external, and as an inner concept. Externally, each individual graphic or pictorial form is an element. Inwardly, it is not this form itself but, rather, the tension within it, which constitutes the element. In fact, no materializing of external forms expresses the content of a work of painting but, rather, the forces tensions which are alive within it. Altered. Nevertheless, this would not mean that painting as a whole would become superfluous. Even the abstract elements of painting would retain their pictorial coloration as do the elements of music. Lack of joyous mobility on and off the surface reduces the time limit of perception to a minimum. The element of time in the point is almost completely eliminated, which, in special cases of composition, makes the point inevitable. Has upon closer, though yet hasty, examination suddenly become doubtful and, as far as no, this first became apparent to the painters. The tendency to overlook the time element in painting today still persists, revealing clearly the superficiality of prevailing art theory, which noisily rejects any scientific basis. This is not the place to cope with this question at greater length, yet a few considerations which throw a clear light upon this time element must be emphasized. In this sense, we will treat the question which has been raised as to whether or not a point suffices to form a work of art. We have here various cases and possibilities. The simplest and briefest is that of the centrally placed point of the point lying in the center of a surface which is square in shape. The restriction of the basic effect of the plane here becomes intensified, and this constitutes a unique case. My definition of the concept composition is as follows. A composition is the inwardly purposeful subordination 1. Of the individual elements and 2. Of the build-up, construction, toward the goal of concrete pictoriality. Also, when a single sound completely embodies the pictorial aim, this single sound must be considered the equivalent of a composition. A counterpart of this point on the basic plane will produce a still more complex result. Repetition is a potent means of heightening the inner vibration and is, at the same time, a source of elementary rhythm which, in turn, is a means to the attainment of elementary harmony in every form of art. Aside from this, we have to deal here with two double sounds. Every part of the basic plane has a sound peculiar to itself and an individual inner coloration. Fig. Star cluster of Hercules. Newcomb Engelmans. Popul. Astronomy. End of page. Originated from points, to which point in its original geometric essence everything returns. These are complexes of geometric points which, in various configurations determined by physical laws, float in geometric infinity. The smallest, self-contained, wholly centrifugal shapes actually appear to the naked eye as points seemingly loosely related to each other. Points are to be met with in all of the art expressions, and certainly artists will become increasingly conscious of their inner power. This significance should not be overlooked. In sculpture and architecture, the point results from a cross-section of several planes. It is the termination of an angle in space and, on the other hand, the originating nucleus of these planes which can be guided back to it or can be developed out of it. Fig. Pagoda of the Dragon Beauty. 41. End of page. Already in the classical ballet form existed points, a designated terminology which unquestionably is derived from point. The ballet dancer leaps to a point above, clearly aiming at it with his head and, in landing, again contacts a point on the floor. High leaps in the modern dance can, in some cases, be compared with the classic ballet's high leap, that, whereas the leap formerly pointed to a straight, vertical direction, the modern leap frequently forms a five-pointed plane with its 5 extremities: head, 2 feet, and 2 hands, whereby the 10 fingers form 10 smaller points, e. Fig. A leap of the dancer Palaxa. End of page. In addition to the beating of the kettle drum and striking of the triangle, of which we have already spoken, points can be produced in music with all sorts of instruments, especially the percussion instruments. The piano, however, enables the creation of finished compositions exclusively by means of the combination and the sequence of tonal points. The above music translated into points. Fig. 11. The above music translated into points. Plus trumpet. Kettle drum. Fig. Theme 2AA. P. ESSSE. A. IAAEAE. E. 639A. Graphic art techniques: etching, woodcut, lithography, atmosphere. In that particular field of painting known as graphic, the point develops its autonomous powers with special clarity. The material tools offer to these powers many different possibilities in the way of diversity of form and size, which establishes the point in countless entities with different sound values. Even here, this multiplicity and diversity are easily classified when the special characteristics of the graphic techniques are used in this classification. Present day is only a springboard to tomorrow, and only in this role can it be accepted with innermost tranquility. No natural difference can or should remain superficial, it must point to the profound depth, that is, to the inner life of things. Likewise, technical possibilities grow in just as functional and purposeful a manner as any other potentiality, whether it be in material life, spruce tree, lion, star, louse, or in the spiritual realm, artwork, moral principle, scientific method, religious idea. Hand in hand with the materials and tools of these three techniques goes, naturally, the necessity of realizing the three different characteristics of the point. While paper can be used as material for these three different techniques, the relation of the particular tool in each case is fundamentally different. The point is created in such a way that the instrument does not touch it. The point is encircled like a fortress with a ditch, and great care is taken not to injure it. In order that the point may enter the world, it is necessary to do violence to its entire pep to tear them out and destroy them. The color is rolled onto the surface in such a way that it covers the point and leaves the surrounding area free. The future print can already be clearly seen upon the block. It is in this manner that the three graphic techniques differ from each other, and in this manner that they are mutually interwoven. Thus, the point remaining always a point takes on different aspects, and is, thereby, a changing expression. These last remarks relate to the special question of texture. The term texture signifies the manner in which the elements are externally combined with each other and with the basic plane. Fig. 12. Concentric complex of points of free form. 51. End of page dash. End of page dash. Nevertheless, even in this restricted realm, considerations of texture retain their full significance. Texture is a means to an end and it must be looked upon as such and so used. In other words, texture must not become an end in itself, it must serve the idea residing in the composition, purpose, just as does every other element, means. Otherwise, an inner disharmony arises in which the means drown out the end. Case, however, it grows out of itself, out of its own center, and only a relative diminution of its concentric tension results. There exists still another force which develops not within the point, but outside of it. This force hurls itself upon the point which is digging its way into the surface, tears it out and pushes it about the surface in one direction or another. The concentric tension of the point is thereby immediately destroyed and, as a result, it perishes and a new being arises out of it which leads a new, independent life in accordance with its own laws. Line. End of page dash. End of page dash. The geometric line is an invisible thing. Is the direction, which is also determined by the movement. They. Of the tension, and 2. Of the direction. This division creates, furthermore, a basis for the differentiation of various kinds of elements as, for example, point and line. In complete contrast to this line, in both an external and inner sense, is the vertical which stands at right angles to it, and in which flatness is supplanted by height, and coldness by warmth. Therefore, the vertical line is the most concise form of the potentiality for endless warm movement. Plane formation 60 Fig. 16 Diagram of deviations in temperature. In this way is formed the star of straight lines which are organized about a common meeting point. This star can become ever denser and denser so that the intersections form a more compact center, in which a point develops and seems to grow. This is the axis about which the lines can move and, finally, flow into one another. A new form is born, a plane in the clear shape of a circle, Figs. May be remarked briefly, that in this case we have to do with a special characteristic of the line, its power to create a plane. This power expresses itself here in the same manner that a shovel creates a plane with the incision-like lines it cuts into the earth. Moreover, the line can by still another method produce a plane, but of this we'll speak later. The difference between the diagonals and the other diagonal-like lines, which one could with justification call free straight lines, is also a temperature difference, as the free straight lines can never attain a balance between warmth and coldness. Color: yellow and blue, black and white. The acentric free straight lines are the first straight lines to possess a special capacity, a capacity which they share to a degree with the colorful colors, and which distinguishes the latter from black and white. Yellow and blue, especially, carry within them different tensions of advancing and retreating. Of the color wheel. Horizontals and verticals occupy a special place among lines because, when in a central position, they cannot be repeated and are, therefore, solitary. If we examine black and white from the standpoint of temperature, we find white more apt to be warm than black, and that absolute black is inwardly unquestionably cold. White, yellow, blue, red, black. Fig. 22. Graphic representation of the descent, of which have already appeared several times in painting. But the exclusive association of the horizontal vertical with black and white has still to take place, then everything will be immersed in inner silence, and only external noises will shake the world. These relationships, which are not to be understood as wholly equivalent values but, rather, as inner parallels, may be arranged in the form of a table such as the following. E1. A strong reaction is to be expected to this exclusiveness, but it will not be in the form of seeking refuge in the past, as is, to some extent, the case today. Graphic form. Pictorial form. This construction is, consequently, the prototype of linear expression or, of linear composition. Fig. 23. Fig. 23. It consists of a square divided into 4 squares, the most primitive form of the division of a schematic plane. The sum of the tensions, consisting of 6 elements of cold rest and 6 elements of warm rest equals 12. This means that it is not easy to fix a limit for the complex and to use the elementary exclusively. Nevertheless, these experiments and observations offer the only means of getting to the bottom of pictorial things which serve the ends of composition. This method is employed by science itself, and has thereby attained, despite excessive one-sidedness, a primarily external order, and continues today with the aid of keen analysis to forge its way through to primary elements. Linear translation. Angular lines. Thus the realm of lines embraces all the expressive sounds from the cold lyric in the beginning, to the hot dramatic at the end. Of course, every phenomenon of the external and of the inner world can be given linear expression, a kind of translation. 1. The results corresponding to the 2 categories are forces, products, point I. 2. Alternate, angular lines. Fig. 24. 1b1. The simplest forms of angular lines consist of 2 parts, and are the result of 2 forces which have discontinued their action after a single thrust. This simple process leads, moreover, to an important difference between straight and angular lines. The angular line is in much closer touch with the plane, and it already carries something plane-like within it. Length's absolute sound 70. The right angle stands unchangeable in size but is able to change its direction. There can be only 4 right angles which touch each other. They either touch with their points and form a cross, or, by the touching of their diverging sides, they form right angle planes, in most instances creating the square. The horizontal vertical cross consists of 1 warm and 1 cold line. It is nothing other than the central position of the horizontal and vertical. Fig. 26 SK. Fig. 27. These 3 sounds can create a triple sound. They can also, on the other hand, be used singly or in pairs, a matter which depends upon the construction as a whole. 3 sounds, angular lines and color. 72. Greed is, nevertheless, restrained in so far as the obtuse angle is not capable of dividing the plane exactly, it goes into it twice and leaves a portion of 90 degrees unconquered. The three different sounds of these three forms thereby correspond. The cold and controlled, 2. The sharp and highly active, and 3. Sharp, active angles and become the signpost to yellow. Thus, the acute angle has a yellow color within. The obtuse angle increasingly loses its aggression, its piercing quality, its warmth, and is, thereby, distantly related to a line without angles which, as will be shown below, constitutes the third primary, typical form of the plane, the circle. The passiveness in the obtuse angle, the almost missing forward tension, gives this angle a light blue tone. Plane and color acute angle. Obtuse angle. The next jump of 30 degrees is the transition from angular lines to straight lines, ABC. Black. Horizontal. If the parallels just made are correct, the following conclusions may be drawn from a comparison of the two: the sounds and characteristics of the components produce, in certain cases, a sum of characteristics which are not covered in the first group. Similar facts are not unknown to other sciences, e. Chemistry. The sum divided into its components in many cases fails to be restored in the combination of the components. Thus, the sum would supply the missing factor necessary to balance. In this way, the components would be derived from the sum lines from the plane and vice versa. Artistic practice supports this professed rule in so far as black-white painting consisting of lines and points acquires a more pronounced balance by the addition of a plane, or planes. As the case may be, lighter weights require the heavier color black. Yet out of this, a deep-lying, and consequently not immediately recognizable, relationship of the two colors can be discovered, both are silence. This example, therefore, perhaps sheds an especially strong light upon the difference between the inner nature of Chinese and Europeans. After thousands of years of Christianity, we Christians experience death as a final silence, or, according to my characterization, as a bottomless pit. Curved line 78-1. Through combinations of acute, right, obtuse, and free angles, and 2. Through various lengths of the segments. Thus a many-angled line can be composed of the most diverse parts from the simpler to the ever more complex. Sum of obtuse angles, which have equal segments, OEQ have. If, particularly in the case of the formation of the obtuse angle, a force is regularly augmented and the angle increases in size, this form tends toward the plane and, especially, toward the circle. The relationship of the obtuse angle line, the curved line and the circle is, thereby, not only of an external, but of an inner nature, as well. The passivity of the obtuse angle and its unaggressive attitude toward its surroundings, causes it to cave in more and more until it ends in the profoundest self-absorption of the circle. Contrasts in lines 80 Fig. 34 tensions of straight and curved lines. Out of this origin, I. The angular line must, therefore, be looked upon as an intermediate element, birth, youth, maturity. Whereas the straight line is a complete negation of the plane, the curved line carries within it a seed of the plane. If the two forces, with the conditions unchanged, roll the point ever farther, the developing curve will sooner or later arrive again at its starting point. Beginning and end flow into each other and in the same instant disappear without a trace. Contrast in relation to the plane three pairs of elements 82. Even the straight line, in the final analysis, carries within it with its other characteristics the desire, even though deeply hidden, to give birth to a plane, to transform itself into a more compact, more self-contained thing. The straight line is capable of doing this, although, in contrast to the curved line which can create a plane with two forces, it has need of three impulses in plane creation. This abstract adherence to law peculiar to one of the arts, finds in this art a constant, more or less conscious application, which can be compared with nature's adherence to law, in which in both cases art and nature affords the inner human being a very particular satisfaction. Fundamentally, this same abstract, law-abiding quality is most certainly the property of other art expressions. The spatial elements in sculpture and architecture won the tonal elements in music, the elements of movement in the dance, and the word elements. In poetry, all have need of a similar uncovering and a similar elementary comparison with respect to their external and their inner characteristics, which call sounds. Planes. The dictionary of a living language is immutable as it undergoes changes perpetually. Words become submerged, die, words are created, come new into the world, foreign words are brought home from across the borders. Fig. 40. Some of the possible variations of the curved line must still be mentioned. IL2. A complex curved or wave-like line can consist of wave-like line, geometric parts of a circle, or two, free parts, or three. 86. Curve free wave-like, displacement of the above lines with the same horizontal extension. The geometric character disappears. 2. Positive and negative pressure with irregular alternation, whereby the former gets much the upper hand of the latter. Fig. 42. Fig. Curve-free wave-like, variations of these last. 1. The high point directed toward the left giving way in the face of the energetic attack of the negative pressure. 2. Stress on the height through the broadening of the line accentuation. Fig. 44. Fig. Fig. 45. Curve geometric wave-like, contrasted to the geometric wave-like line above. Fig. 41. Pure ascent with modest diversions to the right and left. The sudden weakening of the wave leads to increased vertical tension. Radius from bottom to top 4,4, 4, 2, Fig. 46. In the examples given, two different kinds of conditions produce the result. The combination of the active and passive pressures. 2. The contribution of the sound of direction. Associated with these two sound factors can further be 3. The emphasis in the line itself. This linear accentuation is a gradual, or a spontaneous, increase or decrease in strength. Line and plane. Fig. 49. Spontaneous accentuations of a free curved line. The spreading out, especially in the case of a short, straight line, bears a relation to the growing point. Here, too, the question when. How shall the question where? A definite loosening up of the stiff atmosphere of the whole and can, when used to an exaggerated extent, lead to almost repulsive overniceties. At all events, one is here still completely dependent upon feeling. A generally accepted distinction between line and plane is, for the present, impossible, a fact which is perhaps bound up with the still little advanced state of painting, as yet of an embryonic nature, if not possibly determined by the very character of this art. Combined line force composition number 92 HL. The third, and last, basic type of line is the result of the combination of the first two kinds. Consequently, it must be called the combined line. The nature of its individual segments determines its particular character. It is a geometric combined line, if the parts brought together are exclusively geometric. 2. Complexes. The balance is chiefly a matter of patience, which will accomplish the breaking down of the larger complexes into ever smaller, more subordinate groups. Only after the conquest of numerical expression will an exact theory of composition, at the beginning of which we now stand, be completely realized. $4. Some simple examples of rhythm. Fig. 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 Wo fig. 57. Fig. 58. The simplest case is the exact repetition of a straight line at equal intervals, the primitive RYHTHM, fig. 59, or in uniformly increasing intervals, fig. 60, or in unequal intervals, fig. 61. 96. Repetition of the same measures after a somewhat long interruption, or, in the case of repetitions in piano, the movement is qualitatively modified. 1. The third kind, in which a more complex rhythm is used, is the most intricate. Considerably more complicated combinations are possible in the case of angular lines and, especially, in that of curved lines. Fig. 64. Running apart. Quantitative and qualitative intensifications are present in both instances, figs. 63 and 64, nevertheless, they carry within them something soft and velvet-like, and due to this, the lyric oversounds the dramatic. In the case of an opposite arrangement of lines, the contrast cannot attain its full sound. Time. Other arts. Music. 98. The element of time, in general, is discernible in the line to a much greater extent than it was in the case of the point. Length is a concept of time. On the other hand, the time required to follow a straight line is different from that required for a curved one. Even though the lengths are the same, the more animated the curved line becomes, the longer is the span of time it represents. Thus, the possibilities of using line as a time element are manifold. It can be asserted that in music the line supplies the greatest means of expression. It manifests itself here in time and space just as it does in painting. 1. How time and space are related to each other in the two forms of art is a question by itself which, with its distinctions, has led to an exaggerated scrupulousness and, thereby, the concepts of time-space or space-time have been differentiated far too much. The dance, sculpture, architecture. 100. In the dance, the whole body, and in the new dance, every finger draws lines with very clear expression. The modern dancer moves about the stage on exact lines, which he introduces in the composition of his dance as a significant element, Sasharov. The entire body of the dancer, right down to his fingertips, is at every moment an uninterrupted composition of lines, Palaksa. The rhythmic form of the verse finds its expression in the straight and the curved line, where a regular recurrence is exactly denoted graphically meter. Besides this rhythmic measurement of length, which is precise, the verse develops on recital a certain musical melodic line which gives expression, in an inconstant and variable form, to the rise and fall, the tension and the release of tension. Fundamentally, this line is law-abiding as it is bound up with the literary content of the verse. The tension and release of tension are analogous to content. 102 Yvas Mn Fig. 65 Diagram of a sailing vessel. Linear construction for the purpose of movement. Ship's hull and rigging. A EETP minimum. The line partially replaces the number. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Fig. 69. Forest of masts. Dash end of page dash. Fig. 70. A room of the Constructivist exhibition in Moscow, 1921. Dash end of page dash. The connections and rivets are points in these linear constructions. These are line point constructions, not upon the plane, but in space. Fig. 104 External shell of natural phenomena. It should not be replied here that this external shell in objective art is put to the service of inner purposes. It remains impossible to incorporate completely the inner of one realm into the outer of another. The line appears in nature in countless phenomena, in the mineral, plant, and animal worlds. The schematic construction of the crystal. Fig. Fig. 72 Diagram of leaf positions. Points of attachment of the leaves to the shoot, which follow each other in sequence. Basic. K. Geometric and loose structure. 106 Trees alone, fir, fig, date palm, or the most bewildering complexes of the liana and various other snake-like plants. Some complexes are, moreover, of a clear, exact, geometric nature and vividly recall geometric constructions made by animals, as, for example, the surprising formation of the spider's web. Fig. 75. Blossom of the clematis. Photo Cat Both, Bauhaus. Dash end of page dash. Fig. 76 Line formation of a stroke of lightning. Dash end of page dash. This relationship, one may well say identity, is a momentous example of the connection between art laws and natural laws. One must not, however, draw false conclusions from similar cases. The difference between art and nature lies not in the basic laws but, rather, in the material which is subject to these laws. 108 Center, Fig. 77. In painting, a line can exist without subordinating itself externally to the whole, without having an external relationship to the center. The subordination here is of an inner nature. Even this simple fact must not be underrated in the analysis of the relationships between art and nature. The fundamental difference lies in the purpose or, more exactly stated, in the means to the end. In the final analysis, the end in art and in nature must for human purposes be the same. At any rate, it is advisable in either case not to confuse the shell with the nut. As for the means, art and nature, in relation to the human being, move in different directions which are far removed from each other, even though they tend toward one point. After a long extended period of interest in brush painting and following the underestimation in many cases, contempt for the graphic means which was bound up with this, esteem for the forgotten, especially the German, woodcut suddenly awakened. In the beginning, the woodcut was practiced on the side as a lower form of art until it spread farther and more victoriously and, finally, became the characteristic type of work of the German graphic artist. Etching, of all existing techniques, is able to create most precisely the line lying firmly in the material and, more especially, the very thin line. It was, therefore, brought out of the old storage chest, and the search which began for elementary forms was bound to lead to the thinnest line, which, viewed in the abstract, is an absolute sound among lines. 112. As a part of the purpose of this book. Here, as well, lithography offers its rich means for use. Basic plane. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. The term basic. It will be designated here by BP. The schematic BP is bounded by 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines, and is thereby set off as an individual thing in the realm of its surroundings. Nature of the BP sounds above and below element with a completely objective BP should only be looked upon as a relative matter. Absolute objectivity cannot be attained. A fact which is of immeasurable importance and which must be viewed as something independent of the powers of the artist is the dependence of all this not only upon the nature of the individual elements, but upon the nature of the BP itself. Treatment into a new living organism, which is no longer primitive but which reveals, on the contrary, all of the characteristics of a fully developed organism. The above gives the impression of a great looseness, a feeling of lightness, of emancipation and, finally, of freedom. Each one of these related characteristics gives off an accompanying sound, which has in each case a slightly different color. These characteristics of the upper and lower horizontal, which together create a double sound of the greatest possible contrast, can be strengthened in a natural way for the purpose of dramatization, by means of a certain accumulation of heavier forms below and lighter ones above. Thereby the pressure, or, as the case may be, the tension, becomes considerably increased in both directions. Vice versa, these characteristics can be partially equalized or, at least, modified and, of course, through the use of the opposite means, heavier forms above, lighter ones below, or, when it is a case of the direction of the tensions, these tensions can be directed from above to below, or from below to above. It can be assumed that in time, perhaps, means will be found of accomplishing measurements in the above sense with more or less exactness. At all events, the formula which I have just roughly outlined could be corrected in such a way that the relative nature of balance would stand out with clarity. Lightness, although the weight of left in comparison with below is much less. The same holds true of emancipation, and freedom is more restricted at the left than above. Here, the left is, so to speak, affected by above and below, and this takes on a special significance for the 2 angles formed on the one hand by left and, on the other, by above. Just as in the case of the left, this resistance is divided into 2 parts. It increases from the center downward and decreases in strength upward. The same influence on the resulting angles, the angles at the upper right and the lower right, is to be noted here as was observed in the case of left. Tide. 4 boundaries of the BP therefore can be represented as follows. Sequence tension literary 1. Above toward heaven, 2. Left into the distance, 3. Right toward home, 4. Below toward the earth. One should not imagine that these relationships are to be taken literally, and, above all, should not believe that they can determine the compositional idea. BP from the world surrounding it. The approach of a form to the border is, therefore, subject to a special influence, which is of critical importance in the composition. The resisting forces of the borders differ from each other only in the degree of resistance, and this, for example, can be represented graphically in the following manner, Fig. At the beginning of this section, the square was called the most objective form of the BP. Further analysis has clearly shown, however, that even in this case the objectivity may be viewed as nothing other than relative, and that here, too, the absolute is unattainable. In other words, only the point, so long as it remains isolated, offers complete rest. If a diagonal is drawn through the square BP, this diagonal then stands at an angle of 45 degrees to the horizontal. In the transition of the square BP to other tight-angled planes, this angle increases or decreases. The diagonal increases its inclination either to the vertical or the horizontal. It can, therefore, be looked upon as a kind of measure of tension, Fig. Structure. Further tensions 126 decisive in compositional and, more especially, in abstract art. All the tensions of the individual forms on the BP are given other directions each time, and each time, of course, take on different colors. Drawn upwards, the form complexes also become either compressed or extended. Thus, through an unskillful choice of the plane format, a well-conceived order can result in repulsive disorder. The numbers 2, 3, 4 are the resistance forces of the borders. A, B, cent, D are the designations of the four primary parts. This diagram makes the following consequences possible. Part A, tension toward 2 equals loosest combination. Part D, tension toward 3, 4 equals greatest resistance. Parts A and D stand, therefore, in the greatest contrast to each other. Weight 128 Fig. 83 harmonious diagonal. Fig. 84 disharmonious diagonal. The triangle A rests far more lightly upon the one beneath than the triangle ABD, which exerts a positive pressure and bears down heavily upon the one under it. Point D. For this reason, apparently, the diagonal tends to be deflected upwards from the point A and thus compelled to move out of the center. Compared with the mild tension CB, the tension D is of a more complex nature. The purely diagonal direction is accompanied by a diversion upwards. The two diagonals can be designated therefore in still another way, CB lyric. These denotations, of course, are to be understood only as arrows pointing the way to the inner content. Contrasts external parallels 130A. Vertical position RD equals Fig. 85 IL. Horizontal position _ZZ Fig. 86. Two contrasting pairs are created. The first pair, I, is an example of the greatest contrast, since the form at the left is directed toward the loosest resistance and the form at the right toward the stiffest. B. Diagonal position disharmonious. NI. 87 IL. Diagonal position G Fa 7 Fig. Composition. Therefore, these four pairs present for compositional constructions 8 construction different possibilities of basic positions, lying on the surface or hidden be history of art and time 132 neath foundations upon which can be accumulated additional main directions of forms, which either remain centralized or deviate from the center in various directions. Yet obviously, even the first basic foundation can be off-center, or the center can be altogether avoided. The number of possibilities of construction is unlimited. Art transgresses the boundaries within which the time would like to confine it, and so forecasts the content of the future. Let it be noted briefly that the currents of our day which refer to basic structures readily conform with the above-mentioned principles. The eccentricity of American theater art, to which an exact form has been given, is a clear example of the second principle. Relative sound left-right 134 out that attempts to explain art on geographic, economic, political or other purely positive. Only the connection between questions of form in the two above-mentioned fields, on the basis of their spiritual content, can point out the exact line of direction. Positive. Fig. 89 Fig. 90 Obstinacy with forbearance. Obstinacy in stiff tension. The bends are loose. The bends harder. Plane upon plane relation to the border 136 Everything is in the process of growing. When the line is turned toward the left, this growing is more pronounced, toward the right the laborious. Will now pass beyond the limits of my task and place upon the BP not a line, but a plane, which is but the inner significance of the tension of the BP. See above. In the second case, it strikes the edge and thereby immediately loses its tension upwards. As a result, the downward tension increases and it acquires a sickly, almost despairing expression, Fig. 94. 1 Fig. 93 Fig. 138 Fig. 95 Silent lyric of the four elementary lines expression of rigidity. Use of the eccentric, Fig. 97 Diagonals centered. Horizontal vertical eccentric. Diagonals in the greatest tension. If, for instance, simple curved lines were to be used in the examples given above instead of straight lines, the sum of the sounds would become 3 times as great. Every simple curved line, as was said in the section on line, consists of 2 tensions, which produce a third. Furthermore, if simple curved lines are replaced by wave-like lines, every bend would represent a simple curved line with its 3 tensions, and the sum of the tensions would accordingly become greater and greater. Various angles 140 from without is almost altogether lacking in this direction and is chiefly concentrated at the sides. Further variations of the BP are produced through the use of obtuse and acute angles in the most diverse combinations. New possibilities develop out of the opportunity to shape the BP in such a way that it confronts the elements with the angle at the upper right, in either a reinforcing or restraining manner, Fig. The angles can be present in ever-increasing numbers and can thereby become more and more obtuse until, finally, they completely disappear and the plane becomes a circle. This is a very simple and, at the same time, a very complex case, concerning which intend some time to speak at length. It suffices here to remark only that the simplicity as well as the complexity result from the absence of angles. The circle is simple because the pressure of its boundaries by comparison with those of right-angled forms is equalized. The differences are not so great. 142 From the top toward the left, the quadrant 2 represents a gradually increasing restriction of the maximum freedom, and in the course of the quadrant 2-4, this changes into hardness, it, until the progress around the circle is completed. The facts established in describing the tensions in the square hold true for the tensions of the 4 quadrants. Thus meet here, I. The roots of 2 numerical systems, and 2. The roots of the forms of art. If this deep-going relationship actually exists, we have a certain confirmation of our surmise that phenomena which seem to be fundamentally different on the surface and completely separate from each other derive from one single root. Dematerialized plane 144. Of course, the characteristics of the surface depend entirely upon the characteristics of the materials, canvas and its nature, stucco, and the manner of its treatment, paper, stone, glass, etc. And the tools associated with the materials, their use and handling. Texture, which we cannot discuss here at length, is like every other means a precise, but elastic, pliable potentiality for proceeding schematically in 2 directions, i. Combination with the elements the road from the external to the inner. It must nevertheless be strongly emphasized that the properly trained eye must have the ability partly to see the plane, as such, necessary to the work of art, and partly to disregard it when it takes on spatial form. A simple complex of lines can finally be treated in 2 ways: either it has become one with the BP or it lies free in space. Living facts as isolated phenomena and in their interrelationships can be gathered in such a manner. It is the task of philosophy to draw conclusions from this material, and it is a work of synthesis of the highest order. This work leads to such inner revelations as can be given to each epoch. 146. End of page. Appendix 147. End of page. Diagram 1. Point. Cool tension toward the center. End of page. Diagram 2. Point. Dissolution in progress, suggested diagonal dA. End of page. End of page. Diagram 3. Point. 9 points in ascent, emphasis upon the diagonal dA through. Wait. End of page. End of page. Diagram 4. Point. Horizontal vertical diagonal point pattern for a free line. Construction. End of page. End of page. Diagram 5. Point. The black and white points as elementary color values. End of page. End of page. Diagram 6. Line. The same in linear form. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 7. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 8. Line. Emphasized weights in black and white. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 9. Line. The thin lines hold their own in the presence of the heavy point. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 10. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 11. Line. Linear structure of composition. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 12. Line. Eccentric structure in which the eccentricity is emphasized by the developing plane. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 13. Line. Two curved lines to one straight line. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 14. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 15. Line. Free curve to the point accompanying sound of geometric curves. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 16. Line. Free wave-like line with accent horizontal position. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 17. Line. The same wave-like line accompanied by geometric lines. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 18. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 19. Diagram 19. Line. Line. The same complex complicated by free spirals. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 20. line. Diagonal tensions and countertensions with a point which brings an external construction to inner pulsation. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 21. Line. Double sound cold tension of the straight lines, warm 10. Zion of the curved lines, the rigid to the loose, the yielding to the compact. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 22. Line. Color vibration attained in essence through a minimum of color, black. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 23. Line. Inner relation of a complex of straight lines to a curve, left-right, from the picture black. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 24. Line. Horizontal vertical structure with contrasting diagonal end. Point tension scheme for picture intimate. 1925. Dash end of page dash. Diagram 25. Line. Linear structure of the picture little. Next page. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash. Kandinsky, Little Dream in red. Dash end of page dash. Dash end of page dash.